joined, and then when you guys are ready to speak or want to speak to a member of like that, I will pull them back into the meeting, and then when they're done, when you're done, I'll put them back into the waiting.
Well, I think we're ready to convene the governance and strategy meeting. So they might as well be on board, I would think.
Okay.
You only need the mayor because Councilor DeDominicus is not on the board anymore.
Okay. Well, I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Governance Strategy City Operations Committee. And Beth, if you'll do the roll call.
Councilor Barbell?
Here.
Mayor Reed?
Here.
Councilor Kelly? Councilor McFarland? Councilor McFarland?
He's connecting to
He's
audio.
still connecting to audio.
Okay. And Councilor, that's all we have so far. We're good.
Okay, great. Well, let's start with reports from the department representatives. Matt, you have any reports to give?
You're muted.
Matt, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Councilor Barbell, I know you had requested some information regarding any contingency plans for the city's recreation facilities this summer. I do have some thoughts on that if you'd like me to go into those now.
Yeah, I appreciated the information you sent. It was helpful in terms of pushing my thinking. I had fortunately had an opportunity to talk to Jeff Moore, who had gone through some of this process with layoffs and returning people and contract people while he was mayor in Champlain. But I'd love to hear a few other items from you on that.
Yeah, as far as the biggest problem you're going to run into with the rec facilities is staffing. It's not as large of a problem with the gym because the gym is open year round. So, regardless of how long it takes us to staff back up to levels needed in order to operate it effectively, we can do that. What you run into with the beach is, of course, the very short season and the fact that in order to get up to a sufficient number of staff, the quickest that we've been able to do it during my tenure at the city required roughly 2 months. And without assistance from the former members of the rec department or the rec complex, that would be very difficult. But as far as the possibility of contracting with a third party to manage the beach, it's certainly an interesting idea. I would want to discuss the legal implications of that with Corporation Counsel before having any detailed discussions with third parties. But if we were looking to enter into a contract with an organization that could get up to a staffing level sufficient to open the beach very quickly, I do believe that would be our only option going forward for this summer season, at least for the beach.
Yeah, Patrick, did you have something to add?
Yeah, well, what are staffing issues with the beach? Is it primarily lifeguards or, because I know we hire a lot of temporary workers for the beach.
We do. They're all seasonal workers at the beach. Generally, we try to hire between 8 and 10 lifeguards, between 2 and 3 recreation assistants to work the entry booth. Also a beach manager to oversee all operations for the duration of the summer. There's a bottleneck with civil service because you have to go through all of the normal hiring procedures that you would for a permanent full-time employee for everybody who would work at the beach. And the lifeguard hiring is dependent upon their possession of up-to-date certifications, and there are several that New York State requires. In the past 2 years, in order to bring a few candidates who were otherwise qualified, we had to hold special sessions to get those certifications updated for them so they could start work for the city. But it's just a long and cumbersome process. And The difficulty for this particular season is that since we would not be able to tell any potential candidates what date they would be starting, or even if they would be starting at all, depending upon how quickly the restrictions involving the pandemic are lifted, it would be very difficult to attract a considerable number of people with that understanding when they wouldn't be able to guarantee any type of workload for the summer, especially when there are other employment opportunities elsewhere, such as the state beach or other local beaches.
Yeah, as I've looked at it, it doesn't look feasible to kind of go to the same model that we had in the past financially. And my interest in asking you these set of questions and trying to look into this is there an alternative framework that we can begin to build around the beach in terms of what we would do with it, how we would use it, and how, what kind of staffing. And that's why I was interested in whether it's a contracting relationship, whether it's an RFP. It may or may not happen this year, but I'm looking at next year, we could be in the same financial situation. And can we develop some things at a substantial reduction in costs that would still enable us to use that facility? I'm not as concerned about lifeguards. I would prefer to have just, beach patrol. We hire some individuals that are making sure that social distancing is taking place, and and just walking the beach or using the police's ATV to patrol the shoreline. But a variety of different ways of thinking about it is what I'm, just trying to go through at this point to see, is this going to be possible to do anything this year? But if not this year, we have to begin to think about what are we going to be doing next year. And with the gym, I think there's still some potential to think about it maybe in September or the fall, all depending on what the health department says about the level of infection and the amount of social distancing that can be done. I actually looked at the Cumberland Bay campsite, and as far as their website says, they're planning on opening the campsite on May 15th. And I know they aren't subject to the same restrictions that we are from the health department and things, but they have a whole set of COVID-19 requirements that they are going to be putting in place around social distancing. And apparently the state has opened other campgrounds, or campsites, but not beaches. So that's still a big unknown that anybody's going to open up a beach. So that my interest in this essentially is to begin to develop some kind of alternative scenario to utilize that beach and to utilize the gym that would be fiscally possible. So that's that. I know you and I didn't have a chance to talk about that, but that was what was behind this. And I've talked a lot with Mike Kelly, Councilman Kelly, about just the finances on this and where we are and what our impact is, what we can and can't do this year. And I understand that, but I don't want to give up the idea that we're not going to be able to come up with some creative idea about how to do some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can discuss that in more detail with Dean, just to get our options from a legal standpoint, and then discuss alternative modes of operation with my staff and get back to you at a later time.
Thank you. No, I thought what you did was very helpful. It added a lot more information. So it doesn't solve it by any stretch of the imagination. But any other questions that anybody else would have for Matt?
Just kind of following up what Ira is saying, if some contractor came in and said, we have lifeguards, blah, 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 is there things we can be doing now to sort of set up that safety plan with the State Department of Health? So if an opportunity does come where we might be able to open the beach, we are able to do so?
Yeah, there are two prerequisites from the standpoint of the county health department. You need to submit forms in order to be granted a permit to operate a beach. And then there is a second form that is the beach safety plan, which has to be submitted to the county, which they have to approve before the beach can open. That safety plan is an overall operational framework that will demonstrate to them that you are in a position to protect the safety of the public and operate the beach. So the paperwork for the beach permit has been submitted to the health department. I do not know if it has been approved yet. The beach safety plan has not been submitted. We can put that together, base it somewhat off of operations last year and submit that as a contingency. But I would need to check with Clinton County to determine if the city were to decide to go in the direction of a third-party management contract, whether that would require the submission of an amendment to that plan or an altogether new plan.
And as a final question, Matt, if we don't go with a third party, we don't open the beach. It was stated before that people will still go on the beach unless we have police patrolling the beach, which I find unpalatable. Is there some sort of idea of what we can do? Like, would we put signs up that says "Swim at your own risk, no lifeguards available"? Do we have an idea of what's going to happen if we don't open the beach?
That would be a longer discussion with Corporation Counsel, but I would imagine a starting point would be to essentially do what we do in the off season to cover the city as much as possible from the standpoint of liability, which is the posting of no swimming signs, very large no swimming signs on the beach, buttoning up the facility as far as is practical. As you know, there are multiple ways for the public to enter the beach property, and several of those areas lead to, walkways and things that people would want to enjoy whether the beach was open or not. But we can post things very prominently stating that, no swimming is allowed. Some participation from the city police department would probably be a good supplement to that, just to show that the city is taking it seriously and trying to minimize public use. But that is a discussion that I could have in more detail with Dean to see how best to cover the city from a legal standpoint.
Okay, I think I'd like to get on to the rest of the agenda on here. So we're not done with this item, by a long shot. I'll continue to kind of ask probably forward questions to you, Matt, through the mayor. Again, even if we can't do it, I want to have a plan eventually down the road that lays out a framework for how we're going to approach this. And specifically, I'm still not giving up on the gym either in terms of as a community center, the potential use of that and what it's going to take to open it up, but not with the same staffing and approach, maybe a whole different approach to use of that facility. So with that said, I want to move to the agenda items that are brought forward from the departments to be approved. The first one is a request from the city chamberlain to authorize revised capital project 85110.65, the Arnie Pavone Memorial Parking Plaza, by increasing the project total. I don't know if I have to read it all, but I will, by $38,605.04 for a total new of $967,243.04. The additional funding will be transferred from the general fund for 2020 capital project spending. And what is the new additional cost that we've run into at the parking lot?
Sure. On the committee agenda, items 1 and 2 are linked. Item 2 is a request to the council to authorize the signing of 3 separate change orders involving the demolition of the Glens Falls Bank building. The item number 1, that is a separate but related request to increase the appropriation to that capital project in the same amount as the total of the 3 change orders.
Now, so that's increasing. Is Richard on this call right now? I don't know if you call it a call on this. assuming.
Yes,
So that increased to 900 something.
967, 244,
That includes the purchase of the bank?
500,000.
Okay,
And then this engineering design remediation and bid work, 43,988. I believe the demolition management and costs now totals 273, 256. Matt can probably confirm if that's the end of that. There's also 150,000 listed as not spent yet for the parking lot construction.
okay. And so that's, I just wanted to get a sense, because I remember when the bank was purchased, like the estimate of, takedown and stuff was, I think it's almost 600,000. And then the demolition bid came in between 200 and 300,000. So the demolition bid, even though we're increasing it 38,000 roughly today, it's still coming in around 273,000.
Yes, that's correct. And that will be the total cost of the demo because the work has been completed and the 3 change orders on tonight's agenda, those were the only 3 submitted for the project.
What was the change order for? I mean, did they miss something when they made their bid or?
No, I'll go through them one by one. The first change order was, I believe, for $3,500, and that was for an addition to the scope of work to remove the sign that was located in the front yard of the bank building and some of the walkways around it. The reason that was not included on the initial scope of work is because it was included on the items we had hoped to auction from the bank in order to, realize as much revenue as we could before we knocked it down. For whatever reason, nobody decided to buy it, so it remained on the property and had to be removed. So that is the first change order. The second one, I believe, was between $6,000 and $7,000. That was for additional asbestos abatement work on the second floor of the building. And that resulted from some of the water damage that had taken place when there was a water leak in the building over the winter. They had to do some additional prep work in order to clean that up. And the bulk of the $38,000, I think it was about $28,000 for the third change order. That was for, again, for asbestos removal. And these were instances of asbestos that were not found during the initial search prior to demolition. The bulk of it was transite panels that were located under the brick facade that they did not know were there until they actually started tearing down the exterior of the building. And for an asbestos floor that was underneath an existing floor in the lobby.
One last point about the dollars is the 273, 256 has to be advanced from the general fund through the parking fund to the capital project. Since the spending we did for that was taken out of the surplus cash in the capital project, but now we got a final on that. We're going to move that money from the general fund. So that'll add to the 2.2 million that's due from capital projects in the general fund right now.
I guess I just have a little bit of an issue with you bid a contract, you come in, and you would think that they're experienced enough to know that they're going to run into some hiccups, with their contract. And my thinking is, I suspect they build that into their contract price, and then to come back at the end and say, well, we didn't know there was asbestos under the floor, so we want additional money for that to remediate that. I'm not a contractor, so I'm not that familiar with it, but it seems like you submit a bid, you win the project, and you do the job. If you want to come in with a change order on a new construction, you may want to add 3 bathrooms, or you may want to add an extra room. And I see that as a change order that you do. This seems like we had a bid to do the job, and now they want more money beyond what they bid for to do the job.
I can provide.
How am I wrong on this, I guess?
Yeah, I can provide some additional context. Prior to the demolition bid being released, the city contracted to have completed a pre-demolition asbestos survey of the entire building, in which our project manager took samples from various parts of the building, the ceiling, the walls, the floors, sent those samples to a lab to detect whether they contained asbestos and would require specialized remediation prior to the demolition of the whole structure. The bids that were submitted for the demolition were based on the results of that pre-demolition asbestos survey, which did not include the transite panels, which were hidden under the exterior brick, and also the asbestos floor that was underneath the existing floor in the lobby. So when they began to actually demolish those areas of the building and they found those asbestos areas, they have to notify the Department of Labor, and then the asbestos subcontractor has to come back in and clean up that additional asbestos, and that does require a considerable amount of work. So it's not the demolition contractor coming back to us and asking for more money for a job that they already bid. It's them asking for additional money to cover the cost of part of the scope of work that was not known at the time they submitted their bids.
Okay, I didn't realize that it was our project manager that gave them the scope of the asbestos remediation. So somehow that scope, that was wrong, and now we're paying for it. So that seems like that's the way it is right now. Okay, let's look at item 3. This is the transfer of $5,000 from the regular payroll to community development overtime payroll. Is this you're out of overtime pay at this point?
Yes, we've got about $200 to $300 left in OT pay. In the community development office, there is only one ASME member who would be eligible for OT. And that would be exhausted very quickly because that person has assumed not only her normal workload, but because of the furlough, she has assumed much of the clerical duties from the building inspector's office, and also some of the remaining clerical duties left over from the recreation complex. So that overtime that we have left will be exhausted very quickly, I imagine. And this is just to provide that employee the option so we can pay her for her time because it is very difficult to get everything that she needs to get done within the 35-hour weekly stipulation that ASME puts on. We intend to use that OT sparingly, but it is important to have it as an option because this employee has already maxed out her compensatory time per the union contract. So she either works OT or she just can't work at all beyond her 35 hours.
Is this a shared cost then with the building inspector, or if she's eating up some of her time with the building inspector's office, why are you eating it all?
We're not eating it all. I have had discussions with the building inspector and with Richard. If there are tasks involving the building inspector's office that involve OT work, she can charge that particular time, those hours, to the OT pay line in the building inspector's office. If the tasks involve things involving the community development office, of course, it would be charged to our line.
Actually, we should be allocating her time now that she's attending to both jobs for regular time and for overtime. And I said that we could allocate that. All we have to do is just track when she's working for the CD office versus the building inspector's office.
Was there any way to go, Richard, is there any way to go back and allocate that, to calculate that allocation?
Absolutely.
Retroactively?
Sure.
Because
I think it just started this week.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no problem with tracking her time, per office. Not a big deal at all.
Well, I know Elizabeth and I have talked about this a number of times, and it's around overtime, and yours pales in terms of the fire department and the police department, but my feeling essentially is, with the crisis that we're in and fiscally, I think we ought to be just putting a policy out at some point saying there is no more overtime. And we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with when there is an absolute emergency and we need to use somebody, figuring out how we decide that, not we, but how the director and the mayor decide that And we put tighter controls on that whole process. But I know we're running into 5 o'clock, and I don't know if I'd like to move that these 3 items be brought forward to the council meeting. Could I have a second on that?
Counselor Barbill, there's more items than,
Is there more?
do you have an old version?
I have an old version.
I sent you one at the end of, later in the afternoon, so there's 6 items.
I recommend we do have 2 speakers here that you've asked to address the council. So how about if we take the speakers and then continue on with the business?
Sure.
Okay, you'd all had asked or you'd seen the newscast last night on assessments, and I know you're also been receiving a number of concerns from concerned residents on assessments, and we all know how vulnerable a time it is for our city right now. So we actually have a couple of people who can speak to this. 2 aspects of it really, isn't there? There's one is just the process of assessment. And we have Tim Sapitsky here to speak to us on that and on the process-oriented questions of how assessments are done, how they're decided about when to be reassessed, et cetera. And he's spoken to us before on that issue. And then there's the bigger policy question of how to, or when to reassess, or whether we could have had an abeyance of reassessments this year given the COVID-19, or even how our individual entities, the school district, the city, the county, adjust for those assessments. As you know, last year when the assessments rose by almost 4%, I think, in the city chose to then lower the tax rate by 5% to essentially give that money back. And every elected official has that ability to adjust the effect of the assessments through our own actions through the mill rate. So that's obviously not something that is the concern of the assessor's office. They just want to get the assessments right. But there is that second policy aspect, and the chair of the committee that oversees assessments is also here, Mr. Rosenquist, to discuss those policy aspects with you. So how about if we begin with Mr. Sapitsky and talk a little bit about, and answer any questions you might have on the technical issue of assessments, if you're willing to, Mr. Sapitsky.
There's a lot more of me to get in focus than the mayor. Okay. Were there any specific questions by the board, or shall I start from the beginning? How is it that you'd like to proceed?
You proceed, Mr. Serpitsky, please.
What did he say?
You start, and we can ask questions if any arise. And we'll ask questions like after the end.
Okay. So I'll recap from last year, which is how we get to this year. Last year, we were looking at an equalization rate of about 88%, which means that if we had done nothing, then the city taxpayers would have had their tax assessments equalized. And in the city, because the school district is self-contained and the city is self-contained as taxing jurisdictions, the only thing that it would affect would be the county taxes. So we'll move to this year. The equalization rate this year would have been 94. If the equalization rate, and the equalization rate, let me explain that for those who don't know. The equalization rate comes from the state. The state looks at 1 year worth of sales that have occurred in the city between July 1st and June 31st every year. They look at what it sold for versus what it was assessed at. They then take all of the valid sales that have occurred during that year, and they say that you're either right on, you're high, or you're low. And then if you're high or low, they will tell you, you know, what it is the percentage that's, overall, not individually, but overall, that you are low. And then they will apply that to the rest of the market. So this year we were looking at 94, which is certainly better than 88 because of the work that we had done last year and because some of the market had slowed just a little bit. So this year there was not near as much that had to be done. Last year there were 2,500 change of assessment notices that went out. This year there were only 500. The people that got change of assessment notices this year were, we call outliers, meaning that a large portion of the city last year got an across the board 6% increase, which by going out this year to those neighborhoods and seeing did a lot of good because I did not have to change a lot of them. It brought a lot of them right to where they needed to be. However, on just about every street, there were a couple of houses that did need to go more than that 6%. So they were looked at individually. And that is more or less where we were at, today. Now, a lot of what you've been hearing has been about Beekmantown. Beekmantown had a lot of changes. Peru had a lot of changes and a lot of big changes. It's been very quiet. My phone's not been ringing off the hook. I've had one set of informal hearings for anybody who wants to, discuss their assessment. Only half of the time slots were filled. I have informal hearings on Saturday, and as of this afternoon, no one had signed up for that. So at this point in time, I can say that as far as the taxpayers go, it has been very quiet this year as compared to last year. Last year, there were 4 days that we had scheduled for hearings. I went 6 days, and I extended 3 of the 4 days that were already scheduled. So I think a lot of the concern is coming from not necessarily the city, but from those towns, Beekmantown and Peru, that did have big updates.
So I guess the question that I see is people had their reassessments done last year and then had another reassessment increasing it this year.
Well, some people got an across the board 6% increase because in looking last year, in order to get as many properties to match their sale price, basically it's a big broad brush, 6% was applied. However, that did good for a lot of properties to bring them to where they were supposed to be. However, there were properties that needed more than the 6%, and that's what I looked at this year.
Okay, so basically you're saying properties that were reassessed last year and then reassessed up again this year, they were probably just up 6% last year, and there was an actual reassessment based on their specific conditions this year?
Correct. Unless you were in the west part of the city. So the areas that I concentrated on this year were down in the flats, down on, Pine Street, the south end, basically everything south of the river, parts of Maine, Iowa, Louisiana, and then north of the city center over on Saley, Lorraine, and parts of Margaret, as well as parts of Oak, and a little bit of Stetson and Riley, and those that are in that neighborhood.
Yeah, you just mentioned my neighborhood. So if my assessment went up last year and then went up more this year, it's not that it increased that amount in assessed value over the past year.
No, I mean, last year you got 6%, and if yours went up again this year, I felt that it should have gone up more.
I have a question. The question is, last year, I believe we were told the average rate of increase of assessments in the city was 4%. Is that not correct?
I believe the mayor said that. I don't know that I ever said that.
Okay, what was the amount what was the average increase in assessment last year?
I wouldn't know.
Do you know what the average increase in assessments is this year?
No, because it's not really a number that I track or even look at. It's more a matter of each individual property.
You know how were commercial reassessments done this year? Or is this all just residential?
I had hoped to work on a specific part of the commercials this year, which was the apartment houses and the student housing. However, when this hit, our staff was reduced. It was when SUNY Plattsburgh pulled up stakes and closed school for the year. It was not the best time to be proceeding with that particular update. Because there will be some large, well, let's put it this way. We'll see how we come out of this, but my numbers were indicating that there would be a large change in those particular property classes.
Any further question of Mr. Sabrinsky? So those are more the procedures.
I had one, I know that the assessments go up in certain instances, but if the values go down, like say from this COVID issue, I've never seen an instance where the assessments went back down when the actual value of the properties went down.
Well, if you go back to 2010, and it took that long because remember, we use a rolling 3-year average of sales. We don't use just 1 year's worth of sales, because if we had, 2018 was a big year with big increases. If we had just used that, we would have had a runaway increase. But because we were using the sales from 16, 17, and 18 there, I don't want to say blunted, but it at least rounded that off some. And every year we add on a year's worth of sales and we take off a year's worth of sales, so that we're getting a better sense of what the market is doing overall and not just in a snapshot of any particular year. So even if the market were to reflect what happened in 2008 and 2009, it would take, again, like I said, until 2010, it would take probably 2 years at this point for those numbers to work their way into the assessment. And yes, in 2010, there were certainly neighborhoods that were lowered. And it's usually the higher neighborhoods that crater the most as compared to the more affordable housing, which I won't say is entirely recession-proof, but does tend to maintain smaller dips.
Well, Mr. Sierpinski, I live in the South End and represent the South End, and it appears as though, to the unschooled person, such as myself, that we were hit really hard. And there doesn't really seem to be any logic to it. Some streets, 50% of the houses on the street were reassessed both last year and this year. And other streets weren't touched at all. And I just wonder how does something like that happen, if you can explain it to us?
So we look at 3 different values. We look at what the assessed value is currently. We look at what the comparable value is. The comparable value is taking homes that have sold that are similar to the subject property. So we'll take, your house, that we would compare your house with other sales, in this case, 5 other sales that have occurred, all in the South End. And we would compare what those sales tell us about the value of your house. We also use cost. However, cost is usually used in newer. However, the state has been leaning more and more towards using cost for all things. Cost is one of the indicators of value. There's 3 indicators of value. There is income, which we don't use for residential purposes unless it's a multifamily. There's sales, which is what we use most of, and we also use cost. When we went through in this year, if we looked at the comparable value and it was fine, meaning that if we looked at your house and we looked at the other houses like yours that are sold, and it was where it was supposed to be, we did not bother. If I felt that the value on your house was fine, I moved on to the next one. And it could be the next one was fine, but I might get 3 houses down, and for the houses that have sold, it may be that they better reflect that 4th house down, and so therefore that 4th house down received an increase.
Well, I think if we understand the basics, maybe I recommend that we have some more private discussions in a much more lengthy.
I'd be more than happy to, I can speak for hours.
Will that be all right to move on? And then,
I just have one more question. And that's Tim, how I think last year was the first time there's been a big reassessment, or homes have been reassessed in as many as 10 years. How often can residents expect their home to be reassessed going forward?
Okay, so remember when I talked about the equalization rate? As long as the state comes in with an equalization rate, which again is derived from the sales versus what they're assessed at, within 5%, I don't have to do anything. So if I have a house that is assessed at 100,000 and it sells for 105, we're still good. We're within 5%. If that house sells for 95, it's not great, but it's still within 5% the other side of what my assessment is. And if the majority of the sales that occur within that 5%, then I do not have to reassess. So for all of those years that we did not have changes in assessment, the sales were coming in within 5% of what, or enough of them were coming in enough that they were within 5% of what they were assessed at. So if the assessed value is close enough within 5% to the sale values, I don't have to do anything. So it all depends upon the market. Now, the market has come to a screeching halt because the realtors are not working, the attorneys are not working. So it is possible that for the several months that, are going to tail out the end of this, because like I said, it ends in June, because that is our breakoff point every year. I'm hoping that we were on a pretty good trend up until that point, that so we say almost 5 months slowdown will help the overall for next year, because they will be looking for all of those sales from last July 1st to this June to see where we are for next year.
I just wanted to thank you for the explanation on this. But what you're hearing, I think, is some concern, and I suspect you have no authority over this, but
Well, we were all wondering in the assessment community whether the state was going to offer us any guidance at all throughout this. Unfortunately, they did not. The governor did have an executive order that did allow for a 1-month delay of filing the tentative roll, a delay in the grievance process, and a delay in filing the final roll, which is historically July 1st.
Yeah, and I respect the job you're doing, and a good job. I just think that what we're hearing is a lot of concern by people who have lost their jobs. And are saying, here comes government.
Let's put it this way: there's never a good time to have a change of assessment show up in your mailbox.
Exactly, and you can't pick a
particular year. People are afraid, and I understand that.
Yeah. No, and I'm not blaming you for that. I'm just saying, recognize that there's a fear almost out among people about what's going to happen, whether they're going to have a job, whatever. And government comes back and says, okay, well, the governor doesn't hold off on this and says, well, we're going to go ahead with a routine procedure that may result in a 10% or whatever increase in taxes for somebody out that's out there, and they say, oh my God, you know, that people don't really care about the average person that's out here anymore. And so I don't know. I don't know if you hear that, but I've heard that, you know, and but it's a frustration. It's not a reflection on what you're doing. And
As the mayor alluded to, it is, of course, the spending that the taxes come from.
Yeah.
The assessments are just a number. It is a matter of the tax rate that is applied to that number that creates the taxes.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to express, what you're hearing is some, from us, it's a little concern, that's all. Not a reflection on
And I
you.
know that the city is doing its part to, to curb spending so that, their tax rate will reflect that.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the number of questions, and I know you invite having people visit with you, I think councils are making appointments to visit
Anytime.
you as it is. But from the policy dimension, Mr. Rosenquist was gracious enough to come and talk to you about it as well. He chairs the oversight for this assessment group.
Hey folks, how are you doing? It's great to see you all. I'm gonna set myself up right about here. How's that? Can you see me? Yeah. Can you guys
Yes.
see?
Yeah.
Cool. So as Colin has indicated, you all invited me here. Thank you so much. Anything that I can do for you all as your legislative representative of the city, I'm willing to do, and I'm available. Tim pretty much covered a lot of the background for how assessments happen in the city and throughout the county. That's pretty consistent through how things happen throughout the county. And I'm here to answer any other additional questions you might have regarding the other processes regarding assessments and rates in the county.
Chris, was there any discussion on the county level due to the crisis of perhaps freezing reassessments?
That unfortunately, and I think Tim indicated this as well, that unfortunately is not a decision at the county level that can be made. That is a state legislation that is made, and I believe in my research, the last time that postponement of reassessments was made was during Superstorm Sandy, and that was primarily because of the number of houses that were pretty much damaged. And so any assessment that would have been made with a property with some feet of water in their basement or in their house would have not been a fair assessment.
Well, I had just one question. It's a peculiar thing that happens. I bought a couple properties in the city, and I ended up, my assessment was higher after I bought the properties than what I actually paid for them. Is there some add-on that they put in? I'd like to think that I got great deals, but after doing the appropriate rentals, I found I didn't. Is there some reason that it doesn't actually reflect the purchase price on your assessment sometimes?
I'd have to ask Tim that question just because I don't do assessments, and Tim would be the expert to really explain that process for providing assessments after purchase. I quite frankly couldn't tell you. Fortunately, that's not my wheelhouse.
So, Chris, what kind of discussion on assessments does happen at the county policy level?
Primarily from my committee, the real property, the director of real property assessment brings us contracts that the city of Plattsburgh has a contract with the county to do full assessment services, and any negotiations on that contract. Any changes that, in terms of procedural changes that the county departments need guidance on, they would bring to us, but nothing in the sense of how to do their job. That's really up to them to determine how to actually do their job. They're the experts in that, and we kind of rely on them to do that.
Has there been any changes on procedures in the past couple of years?
Not that I know of. A lot of these deadlines, as Tim indicated, are state driven, and other than the executive order that Tim mentioned of the 1 month postponement, these deadlines. Short of that, that's really driven by the state.
So last year, when we saw the assessments go up, we dropped our tax rate significantly. We had a lot of extensive discussion over that issue. Does the county discuss lowering their tax rate to adjust for the higher assessment value?
Well, we actually have adjusted our tax rate lower, and we posted the lowest tax rate at 596, I believe it is. I'll go back and look, 596 per thousand. And I believe that was the lowest that we've seen since 2011. And I was actually chair of the finance committee when we lowered that tax rate that low.
What percentage rate reduction was that?
From the year prior, I only couldn't tell you.
Any further questions?
Well, last year, the city lowered our tax rate effectively 1% to address assessments. And we plan to do that again this year, if at all possible. What about the county, Chris? Do you think the county might do the same thing?
Unfortunately, I couldn't tell you at this time just because we don't, our sales tax numbers, we just got our sales tax numbers today. Year compared to last year, we look good, but we're not going into the negative quite yet. We do expect to go into the negative with sales tax. I think, as Tim indicated, your equity rate or your
Equalization rate.
your equalization rate, once the county took over your assessment services, I believe your equalization rate was low enough that ended up bumping up everybody across the board. And so at that point, that's when everybody saw that massive increase and that massive spike in your tax assessment. And when the county took over that book of business for you all, I believe that's when it was up to us to bring you up to that to the state recommended, the state required equalization rate.
Yeah, I don't know who told us this, but last year someone told us that we had an average of 4% increase in our assessments. So that informed us on what we should, correspondingly reduce the tax rate by. And I assumed it was the assessor's office that gave us that figure of 4%, but I could be wrong.
I mean, they would have
We'd
that
like to know
rate,
that
and
number again this
historically,
year,
the city of
possible,
Plattsburgh has
so
those
that we
numbers
can
as well.
plan our tax rate for 2021.
Yeah.
Any further questions?
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
Hey, folks, thank you. I appreciate it. Stay safe out there. I know this is a really tough time for everybody, so I appreciate the invite. And as I said, I'm 100% available to you all. Let me know how I can be of service, okay?
Thanks. And just to clarify, actually, I think our tax rate went down by 5% to adjust for the 4% average increase in assessments. So our taxpayers were netting a lower tax payment by about 1% once you adjust those two factors. So I think we've just about run out of time and have to move to the main body of our meeting, if that's all right with everybody.
You have to move those items to the agenda, Mayor.
With regard to moving these items to the agenda.
Yes, I'd like a motion to move items 1 through 6 to the council agenda.
Just you and the mayor.
Yep, I'm comfortable with that. I think I'd like to see more discussion. You mentioned a discussion on overtime practices as well, and I don't think we've completed that discussion, so I'm not sure how to deal with that one item.
Well, we can move it. We could discuss it at the full agenda.
Okay, sure. Do you feel you have enough information then to move these items to the main agenda? If so, I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now it's the new business, old and new business.
I
For the
believe,
barbell.
there is no old business. Any new business to come to this committee? Hearing none, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, then let's, all those in favor, aye? Just raise your hand. Thank you. We're adjourned. We can move to the other agenda.
Thanks. So let's begin the Common Council meeting tonight with a pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of
of
America,
America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Really 5 different, hard to get synced in that one. Appreciate it though. Just a couple of comments.
Have a roll call, Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry, roll call, please.
Mayor Reed,
Present.
Councilor Barbell,
Here.
Councilor Kelly,
Here?
Councilor Gibbs,
Here.
Councilor McFarland, Councilor Moore,
Here.
Councilor McFarland,
I'm here.
Councilor Moore.
Here.
Thank you. Just a couple of announcements. First of all, I appreciate the discussion and being informed on how the assessments work. And I'm certainly grateful, and I think I share the consensus with you all that we really need to take these assessments and then adjust our tax rates accordingly. So we, like we did last year, more than protect the taxpayers for the city of Plattsburgh. And Mr. Sapinski's comments on how the mechanics of this worked was, I thought, very helpful. So I appreciate it. He's left. We do have a couple of guests here. Justin Ein from the YMCA is in attendance, and Steve Brody's in attendance as well. And I got one proclamation I'd like to offer. Whereas we honor and respect our elders and citizens of any age with physical or intellectual disabilities who reside in skilled nursing care centers in the city of Plattsburgh, New York. And whereas skilled nursing care centers throughout our area are holding window, virtual, or recorded video visits in observance of National Skilled Nursing Care Week, May 10th through 16th, 2020, using this year's theme of sharing our wisdom. And whereas the residents and highly committed healthcare providers are very much in this together, and for that we are very grateful. And whereas we do our part to help them both by ensuring we practice safe distancing, and whereas I urge all citizens to virtually visit or call a loved one, family member, or friend residing in any care setting and offer a kind word and spend time participating in various virtual activities to unite those from all walks of life in need of our continuing love and support. Whereas my administration is committed to quality health care, we take this moment to embrace the essence of the theme, sharing our wisdom. Let's join all residents, patients, caregivers, nurses, and other staff and volunteers in celebrating this special week. Therefore, do I, Colin Reed, Mayor of the City of Plattsburgh, declare the week of May 10th through 16th, 2020 as National Skilled Nursing Care Week, a week to honor both our vulnerable citizens who receive care and the dedicated ones giving care. In witness thereof, I hereby attach my hand and official seal to this proclamation. So thank you all very much for your service, especially in these very critical times. And please continue.
Resolved that the minutes of the regular meeting of the Common Council held on April 30th, 2020 are approved and placed on file among the public records of the city clerk's office.
Moved by Councilor Barbell and second by Councilor Kelly. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Passed.
Resolved that the payrolls of the various departments of the city of Plattsburgh for the week ending May 6, 2020 in the amount of $492,816.96 are authorized and allowed, and the mayor and the city clerk are hereby empowered and directed to sign warrants drawn on the city chamberlain for the payment thereof.
Moved by Councilor Kelly and second by Councilor Moore. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Passed. You have your various reports for your consideration. Are there any additional reports, beginning with governance, strategy, and city operations?
Well, we just had our meeting and had a very interesting report on the assessment process that was part of that meeting. We moved a number of items to the full agenda. And I think that's about it. We'll get into some of those items in more detail when they come up on the agenda.
Thank you. City Infrastructure, Councilor Moore.
I don't have anything this week, but I'll have a lot more to report when we meet next week for our infrastructure committee meeting.
Thank you. Finance and Budget, Councilor Kelly.
I prepared our weekly finance update and emailed it to all of you earlier today. I don't think there's any need to go through it tonight. You can study the slides yourself. But we'll do it again next week. We'll have our brief financial update for you. I'm sure the numbers will have changed some by then, so we want to watch them very, very closely. The first time I think we'll be able to talk about the actual savings from furloughs and layoffs and see what that's doing to our budget this year. So that'll be interesting to take a look at. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And if you want to give a big report during new business with your slideshow, please feel welcome to do it then.
I might.
Okay. Plattsburgh Public Library or Public Safety, Councilor Gibbs, pardon me.
So we've been having some ongoing discussions within council about concerns with overtime. And I reached out through Beth and the mayor and asked Chief Lawless to come up with a pretty extensive report of overtime costs and profits. And I'm hoping to get that within a couple of weeks because I am asking him to do quite a bit. I don't anticipate I'll get that next week. But I wanted the council and the public to know that we are watching it very closely. And I'll be engaging in conversations with Chief Lawless to see what we can do about the costs.
Thank you. Plattsburgh Public Library, Councilor McFarland.
Yes, our library director has been communicating with other directors across the state and working on a plan to reopen the library in line with the schedule that the governor laid out and in line with the CDC guidelines. It's expected that the library is going to see a 25% cut in state aid, which for our library would probably lead to an additional cut of $26,000 from their 2020 budget. So that's painful. I guess kind of could have seen it coming with the certainly the budget crisis the state finds itself in. Right now, the library is looking to have a staggered opening beginning on August 3rd with plans in place for to promote social distancing and the cleaning, regular cleaning of surfaces. And I can move on to MLD if you like, Mayor.
Please, yep, thank you.
MLD, not too many updates. We had our board meeting just last week, and I believe the CFO Kluge, if I remember the number, she said they were looking at about a 25% decrease at that time, although don't quote me on that. We're going to be able to see the real effect of how COVID-19 and the shutdown is possibly affecting the finances of MLD when the next round of bills come in, because they're usually a couple months behind. So we're anticipating that. We'll look at that and we'll keep everyone informed when we know more.
Thank you. Resolve the reports as listed are hereby ordered received, and any written reports are placed on file among the public workers of the city clerk's office. Moved by Councilor Gibbs and second by Councilor Kelly. All in favor? Opposed? Passed. No correspondences or recommendations from boards at this time, but with your indulgence, I would like to move up an appointment at this time for the convenience of an attendee. It's with great honor that I would like to recommend and hand down the appointment of Steve Brody for the vacant Common Council seat of Ward 4 beginning May 8, 2020 and expiring December 31st, 2020. And he'll actually be signing the oath after this meeting, so it won't actually officially begin by next week. But with your consideration, we'd like to come up and say a couple of words, Mr. Brody.
There we go. I would just like to say, everybody, it's a great honor to be here, and I am pleased to serve the city for the next 6 months. It'll be my honor. And thank you. I'll stand over on the side right there.
Well, thank you very much, and I believe this would then require a roll call.
Counselor Barbell,
Yes.
Counselor Kelly, Counselor Gibbs,
Yes.
Counselor McFarland,
Yeah.
yes,
Yes.
Counselor Moore,
Yes.
I think we normally shake hands, but in these circumstances, we won't, but we very much appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to having you join us next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Welcome, Steve.
resolved that the bills audited by the Common Council for the week ending May 8th, 2020, in the amount of $719,762.22 are authorized and allowed, and the mayor and the city clerk are hereby authorized and directed to sign warrants drawn on the city chamberlain for the payment thereof.
Moved by Councillor Moore and second by Councillor Gibbs. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Passed. This is not an opportunity for members of the public to please address the council. There's no members of the public on an agenda item tonight. We did talk about recreation and the beach early on in the meeting in the work session. I do have Justin Ein from the YMCA, and if you'd indulge us in comment in the second public comment period, we'd like to have you do that then, if that'd be all right. And he may be able to answer any questions. I know Councillor Barbell had especially a lot of interest in other groups willing to partner with the city at this time. So maybe we can delay that conversation to the second public comment period. Beth, are there any individuals wishing to address the council, or Ethan?
No. There's no email correspondence.
And there's no attendees at this time. Okay, please continue.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore, the Common Council approves that the city chamberlain is authorized to revise capital project H5110.65, Arnie
Beth?
Pavone Memorial.
Beth, I'd like to make a motion to waive the reading and move to resolution on items A, B, and C.
Is there a second? Second by Councillor.
Who?
I would, is it time for discussion? I would like to move A and B and keep C as a separate conversation.
Is that acceptable, Councillor Gibbs?
Yes.
And a second? Councillor McFarland, all in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
Discussion on items A and B, which you discussed in your work session. Seeing none, roll call.
Counselor Barbell,
Yes.
Counselor Kelly, Counselor Gibbs,
Yes.
Counselor McFarland,
Yes.
Counselor Moore,
Yes.
resolved.
May I make a suggestion? If a counselor doesn't orally vote, Beth, could you just remark what that counselor's vote was when you observe it?
Yes. Counselor Kelly voted yes. I think everybody else voted verbally. Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore, the Common Council approves a budget transfer of $5,000 from Community Development regular payroll to Community Development overtime payroll, thereby not requiring an increase to the 2020 general fund budget.
Moved by Councillor Gibbs, second by Councillor McFarland. Discussion. And one question I had, I understood that the individual concerned was moved to 40 hours a week as part of a settlement with the AFSCME union recently. Isn't that correct?
Matt needs
know
to
this.
get back to me, Ethan. There you go.
Mayor, I'm sorry, I was listening, but there was a bit of a delay. Could you ask that question again, please?
You said earlier that the individual concerned was working a 35-hour week. I understood that she's now working a 40-hour week according to an AFSCME negotiation.
Yes, my understanding is that an agreement was reached in principle between the AFSCME union and the city. But to my knowledge, the formal transfer or transition of the staffer in question to 40 hours a week had not yet been consummated.
So if it is consummated, would that mean that we could figure a way to restructure things and have more use of other staff time to not require overtime?
It would certainly help, but from the standpoint of this particular resolution, it would be helpful, at least to have the option, if we need it, to have that particular staffer work overtime in a particular situation where there was no other option, and it was in excess of 40 hours a week, which I do see happening just based on the workload that she's assumed.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, just so I'm clear, we're looking to consummate that agreement for 40 hours, but then we're still talking about where's my agenda? A $5,000 shift from regular payroll to overtime. Is that my understanding? Is my understanding correct, I guess?
That's correct. And that transition to 40 hours a week would lessen the need to charge OT in the future, but again, I would still like to have the option available if we do need it.
My position on this, I think, is that we've got to at least at some point take a hard line on overtime, and not just with you, Matt, and this individual, but with all departments. And so I'm going to vote no on this, but I hope that the 40 hours helps on this. And obviously, it's going to be difficult for everybody in every department, I think, if we start looking at some kind of blanket prohibition on overtime unless there's an absolute emergency that the mayor can actually intercede and authorize it.
Any further discussion? Roll call.
Councilor Barbell,
No.
Councilor Kelly,
No.
Councilor Gibbs,
No.
Councilor McFarland,
I share Ira's view that overtime should be used sparingly, and hopefully the 40 hours will fix it. But I'll vote yes, because it would be. I know that there's sometimes emergencies.
Councilor Moore.
No.
It's 3 noes and 1 yes. It's defeated. Whereas on January 22nd, 2020, the city of Plattsburgh released a request for proposals for the operation of the city marina. And whereas the Common Council acknowledges receipt and review of the only proposal received in response to the city's request for proposals, which was entitled Proposal for Marina Operation and/or Building Lease for Plattsburgh City Marina, submitted by the Plattsburgh Boat Basin, Inc. on or about February 18th, 2020. And whereas due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has included the closure of the U.S.-Canadian border to non-essential crossings, the scope of the 2020 boating season has likely diminished. And whereas due to the likely diminishment of the 2020 boating season, the city of Plattsburgh Boat Basin refined and renegotiated their previously submitted proposal. And now, therefore, it is hereby resolved, in accordance to the request, therefore, the Common Council approves that the mayor is authorized to sign the marina management agreement between Plattsburgh Boat Basin and the city of Plattsburgh in a form approved by the Corporation Council.
Moved by Councilor Gibbs and second by Councilor Kelly. Discussion. Roll call?
Counselor Barbell,
Yes.
Counselor Kelly,
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs,
Yes.
Counselor McFarland,
No.
Counselor Moore.
yes,
That's 3 yeses. Oh, I'm sorry, 4 yeses and a no. That's adopted. Whereas the city of Plattsburgh
Make a
owns,
motion to waive the reading on this, this item and move it to.
You should have done, sorry, sorry, Pat, we should read this.
Oh, Beth, I withdraw my motion.
whereas the city of Plattsburgh owns plus or minus 224 acre parcel, which is identified as tax map parcel 220-4-32 on the 2019 assessment roll subject parcel. And whereas the subject parcel is accessed via Reeves Lane and is bounded to the south by the Saranac River, to the east by private property and SUNY Plattsburgh, to the north by Ruger Street, and to the west by I-87. And whereas the subject parcel is adjoining the city's territorial boundaries and is located in the town of Plattsburgh, primarily in an industrial zone, with the northern portion of the subject parcel located in the service commercial zone. And whereas other than underground utilities and Reeves Lane, the only improvement on the subject parcel is the city-owned compost facility, as the remainder of the parcel is uninhabited and unimproved. And whereas while it is located in the town, the city has long recognized the enhanced value of this adjoining property if it were to be annexed into the city, and further recognizes that any annexation effort ultimately requires a determination of overall public interest pursuant to the GML. And whereas the city intends to pursue the annexation of the subject parcel, including any parcel encompassed therein, as furtherance of the overall public interest. And whereas the annexation of a parcel greater than 100 acres is a type 1 action, and whereas the determined date, May 15th, 2019, DEC Commissioner Basil Segos confirmed that the city of Plattsburgh is the lead agency for the SECRA review for the reasons set forth in that determination. And whereas by letter dated June 7th, 2019, in the city of Plattsburgh invited the town to provide written comments as soon as practical regarding any significant environmental impacts identified by the town, so that the city may take the requisite hard look at these potential impacts, and also invited other participation. And whereas the city has received various consultant reports and recommendations in furtherance of the environmental review. Now therefore be it resolved that the Common Council of the city of Plattsburgh, as designated lead agency, determines this proposed annexation review a type 1 action, and be it further resolved that the Common Council has received and reviewed part 1 of the long form EAF, the EAF narrative, and the various consultant reports studies identified in the EAF narrative, and resolves to take a hard look at potential environmental impacts at a public meeting through the completion of part 2 of the long form EAF. And be it further resolved that the Common Council authorizes and directs the city planner, city attorney, and or special legal counsel to take such further actions as may be necessary to effectuate the intent of this resolution.
Moved by Councilor McFarland, second by Councilor Gibbs. Discussion.
So just to clarify, in the event this resolution is approved, that will allow us to review part 2 of the EAF.
Will we do that at this meeting, Dean?
Yes.
Okay. I think we're prepared.
Roll call?
Counselor Barbell,
Yes.
Counselor Kelly,
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs,
Yes.
Counselor McFarland,
Yeah.
Counselor Moore.
yes.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. Ethan, is there Mike or Milena on?
Yes, both of them are on. I'm pulling them forward now.
Okay, so I can start with an overview. Mike Kuhn is a member of AEDA, our engineering consultant firm, and Milena is our city planner. Both have been involved in this process. So as the council's aware, everyone has received a long form environmental assessment form in furtherance of the seeker review for the annexation. Again, this is a type 1 action, and as Beth noted, the city of Plattsburgh has been designated the lead agency by the DEC commissioner. In addition to the typical long form EAF, environmental assessment form, you will also have received an EAF narrative, which summarizes various consultant reports that the city has requested, received, and reviewed in furtherance of this environmental study. Those consultant reports were all distributed to the Common Council, as you know, and they include, first and foremost, a preliminary master plan, which is by no means a specific project that's going to be proposed, but rather a series of potential development opportunities on the site. So if you look to that master plan, which is part of your materials, you'll see there's a proposed or potential mixed use and residential commercial area, which is between I-87 and Ruger Street. And then if you move farther down on that proposed master plan, there are a series of industrial building envelopes which kind of track around Reeves Lane, as well as a conceptual electrical substation. Now, quickly regarding that substation, in the event this property is brought into the city through the annexation process, that MLD would be able to power the site, and the site would be able to benefit from the green energy and inexpensive energy that MLD can provide, particularly for industrial commercial users. The master plan, as you track further down Reeves Lane, it does, after you pass through several potential building envelopes, which again are preliminary. There's no specific proposal at this point. It just shows what a build out could look like in the future. So as you travel down, there's a potential solar farm, and then we get to the existing compost plant. That compost plant is currently permitted, but it is not currently in operations. And then as you get further down towards the Saranac River, this property does adjoin the Saranac. You will see there is a change in grade, relatively steep grade. And as you get close to the river, there's a proposed recreation path. In personal experience, as a mountain biker, there is an existing unimproved recreation path. I think the intention, if this was to go forward and the annexation was complete, would be to have an established and formal recreation path that potentially connects with the Saranac River Trail. And as you can see, it runs directly adjacent to the Saranac River. So that is a summary of the master plan. There are other, and certainly there'll be a lot more discussion in the future if this seeker process is complete, because this preliminary master plan would be the basis for the petition and eventual public hearing with the town of Plattsburgh, the schools and fire districts. But referring back to the consultant reports, there's a natural resource inventory prepared by the Trudell Environmental Services, who completed a summary of the natural communities, wildlife, and existing ecology. There's also a phase 1A literature search and sensitivity assessment, which was prepared by the Hudson Valley Cultural Resource Consultants Limited, which studies potential archaeological and other history of the site. There's also a phase 1 environmental site assessment report regarding the former Norco concrete plant. As you know, a portion of this site did house the Norco concrete facility, which was basically a concrete plant that operated for several years. And there are some existing structures and historic impacts based on that plant's operations. Then there's the preliminary master plan. There's also a depiction of the a proposed zoning map, which does recognize the town's existing zoning classifications as well as the city's proposed classifications. And you will see that they're very similar to the extent that the bottom portions of the site are proposed to be zoned industrial, other than the recreation path along the river. And the areas closest to Ruger Street are similar to the town's existing zoning classification, which I believe is service commercial. And in this case, it's proposed a similar analogous classification of mixed use, residential and commercial use. as other materials include a summary of the available services, a Google map showing their proximity to the site, as well as, again, a depiction of the existing town zoning map. And then the final report is a traffic study prepared by Stantec Consulting Services, and they performed an analysis of the existing traffic impacts as well as reasonable assumptions in the event this preliminary master plan were to be developed in the future, what kind of traffic control devices would be required based on certain phases of the build out. So those are the materials as well. There is a summary of everything I just described in the narrative environmental assessment form, which summarizes those reports as well as provides material for the council to review when we do move on to part 2 of the EAF. Before we do that, I would turn it over to Mike or Milena if they had anything else to add. And then once they're done, we can work our way through the part 2 of the EAF.
Dean, thank you. That was a good representation. Just to provide a little bit of insight on the master plan, it was really done as a long-term planning exercise. It started at the point where PMLD looked at a portion of the property for development and hence since then has moved elsewhere, but we've carried forward some of the long-term objectives with industrial, light manufacturing, commercial business uses. We use sizing very similar to what TDC has developed throughout the area and other similar sized light manufacturing type uses found in the city currently. So that was sort of the background of some of the layout we did in concept, just to see what type of scale of development may be permissible on the land. And similarly along Ruger Street, with residential in a clustered environment similar to just east on Ruger Street across the city bounds with some residential neighborhoods. So we tried to keep it in character of existing scale of development and as Dean mentioned with the substation to serve the area also. So that's a little bit of background on the concept we came up with.
Milena, are you on this call?
I am. Hi.
Hi. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think that's a great overview. As you mentioned, we're in the midst of, the secret process and we have all this backup documentation. I think we're more than ready to move through with, part 2.
Okay, thank you. So as we work through part 2, it's certainly a council-driven action. As we all know, the standard, it requires this council to take the requisite hard look at potential environmental impacts. This is a bit of a unique project to the extent, as I mentioned, and Mike and Milena mentioned, this is a preliminary concept that we're reviewing. So in some regards, it's difficult because, no one can predict the future. And specifically in this case, because it's an administrative or legislative action, that we're seeking an annexation. It does allow, as you'll see in part 1, to skip over some of the really site-specific questions on the EAF. But that being said, we have to not only, we can't stick our head in the sand and view this in a vacuum. We do have to anticipate what potential construction could occur if this annexation is successful. Before we jump into that, though, one other quick point. There are some, as you know, the Saranac River is surface water and adjoins this site. There are also some wet areas on the property because I don't believe any are designated, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe there's any new DEC designated wetlands, but there are, because of a failure for Norco to fully remediate the site, there has been some nuisance species of beavers identified, which have created some emerging wetlands. So it's something we're recognizing that in the narrative EAF that there are some wet areas on the site, but because we don't have specific projects yet, it's difficult to anticipate exactly where those projects are going to go and what mitigation efforts are required for those wetland areas. Mike, is that accurate?
Yes, so there are no DEC jurisdictional wetlands, which are really the large, far-reaching wetland areas. There's definitely potential for isolated, smaller wetlands that should site-specific development be proposed at any time. Any impacts to those wetlands would go through the natural permitting courses as in anywhere else. And I don't think Dean touched on it specifically in regards to mountain biking, but we've also identified the preliminary layout of the Saranac River Trail extension, working through the master planning documents with that association. So we've tried to build in any known plans or past development on the site as well with the master planning.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So with that, I know it's difficult when we're all in person, and it creates just some logistical hurdles now that we're all on our, in our own homes or in City Hall. But if everyone could possibly pull up the part 2 of the environmental assessment form, and my strategy would be to review each topic question, which there's 18 of them. So we'll try to be as efficient as possible. And the question, there's big picture questions, which if they're answered in the negative, then we move on. But if they're answered in the affirmative, then there's sub questions that we'll go through. Each of those sub questions then has 2 choices, whether the impact will be negligible or small, or alternatively, whether the impact would be moderate to large.
Dean,
Yes,
can I ask a question?
yes.
So this part 2 form that we're going to go over together, we're only talking about actual annexation, right? That's what we are focusing on. So
yep.
I hear the conversation about master plan and possibility that we may build on it down the road, but that's not what we're deciding. That if we decided down the road, that would require another seeker process. Isn't that correct?
Generally, yeah. I mean, any action requires a seeker review. Whether that action would trigger a no review or a limited review or really formal review depends on the specific project. But your answer is yes. But I do know if you look to the tips for completing part 2, which is on the top of that page, that the public body is directed to consider the possibility for long-term and cumulative impacts as well as direct impacts. And a lot of the questions are whether the action may involve or may trigger. So I would 100% agree if you have a question that's really specific to, basically if there's a number in the question, it's generally specific to a really site-specific question answer that's related to a project that's tangible. But when there's, and this is not a rule of thumb, I'm just trying to give some general suggestions about how do we interpret this. But if the question involves kind of a potential for impacts without really a site-specific numerical basis, then that may trigger an affirmative answer. The goal here is to take a hard look at this project, but it's not in a vacuum. We all know that. So I certainly don't recommend, just because this is kind of an administrative or a legislative act, that all answers are simply no just for that fact alone. I think you have to look at this preliminary master plan and go from there. And we have to do our best. And the more conversation, the better.
So what I'm hearing you say is that like on the first item, it's the impact on land. Obviously, if this master plan we're going to go forward, then we would indicate that that would have to be a no, and we would say that there is going to be the proposed action may involve construction that continues for more than a year to develop this master plan. Is that what you're saying?
So taking that as a lead, if this proposed action may involve construction, which we just described potential building envelopes, so I think you would have to say yes. Again, that's the board's call, but in that case, it would be a yes. And then when you get to the A through E, those are, or A through D rather, those are really specific to a project, and you don't have that information. And I think you could legitimately answer no to small in that. But when you get to E, as you just observed, this, that's exactly what we described, that this this proposal may involve construction in the future. So that could be an appropriate one to say, yeah, that is occurring here.
So Dean,
But
what
again-
you're saying, if I'm correct, is that even though the action that's planned on taking is just changing a boundary line, essentially,
Yep.
what municipality this would be in, we're not making that decision in a vacuum with closing our eyes to all the potential choices that could be made in the future, and that we should, and that even though we're not approving this master plan, and you know, my own personal opinions on master plans being there are a lot of BS, but we should use that as illustrative of what can be done.
Exactly.
Now, Dean, does the town have a master plan for this area now? And should we be comparing it to their master plan? Because like if, you know, if they have a master plan to build something on their, to develop it in 20 years in the future, that's like the exact same as our master plan, then there wouldn't be a difference generally.
Yeah, so good, really good question. The town does have a master plan. And part of the eventual the annexation analysis is you have to look at the jurisdiction who's being annexed and see what their plans were, as well as our plans for the annexing jurisdiction. So you kind of compare the two. And where they align, that's a good thing. Where they don't align, that would be the ultimate question of is one versus the other in the overall public interest. The other wrinkle here or factor is that the city owns the property. So I don't want to say regardless of the town's planning, but there's certainly a stronger position. And that was one of the primary reasons that the DEC commissioner determined that the city was lead agency, was because we control the property. Therefore, regardless of jurisdiction, the city's the owner of the property and can control what happens in the future. Okay. So I guess we don't need a motion per question, but if we could kind of have some conversation and build a consensus. And Ira brought up number one. So the question is, does proposed action, whether the proposed action may involve construction on or physical alteration of the land surface of the proposed site? Yes or no?
Yeah, I would say if you're thinking of possibly going some route akin to that master plan.
Okay. Is there a show of hands? Does everyone agree with Pat?
No, I don't.
Okay. So Elizabeth doesn't. So Ira, Jeff did. Who are we missing? Mayor, what do you have any input, or you'll leave this to the council? I know you're not voting in this case, so. Okay, Elizabeth, so you say no because is it purely because it's an annexation action?
Yes,
Yeah, I kind of agree with Elizabeth too. Like, because
it's just
we're
annexation. That's
thinking
all
about-
that this encompasses. That's all that this seeker form is dealing with, is the annexation. Annexation does not include construction, disruption of the wetlands. You know, I read through this whole form while the committee was having their meeting. If we make the decision to build on the property or make some kind of construction, or you know, that's going to trigger its own next seeker process. So on its face, this is for annexation only, which means it will not impact the land.
I agree with Councilor Gibbs.
Okay. So I don't think, you know, in this case, if you see this, you know, we don't stick our head in the sand. We see that there's other, you know, all of this, the questions below it. So if there are any questions below that may trigger it, you know, that's kind of a judgment call. It doesn't hurt to say yes and then say no to a majority of the other questions because of that factor.
What Dean's saying is we have to keep an eye on the future, and if we're doing this annexation for to pursue any possibilities for it that you know, other than keeping it fallow and not touching it, then maybe we should be sort of forthright about that now and indicate that even though we're not you know, saying this is exactly what we're going to do, these are just illustrative, like academic ideas of what can be done, but that we're probably annexing this to do something with it. And if we just say no, this is just because I had the same thought as you, Elizabeth, that this is just changing a town line and it doesn't make any change on the ground. It's a,
Right, and as Councilor Gibbs said earlier, though, if we ever did anything in addition, it would require another set of actions where that no may well be a yes. And obviously, this is recorded, so we can understand the legislative intent of this. But at this point, for an annexation exercise where we have existing structures and we'd like to bring them into the city and provide for city power, I still see the answer is no in this limited question we're being asked on annexation here.
So because we have, I would say, somewhat of a split, you tend to want to err on the side of taking the hardest look possible. So in a kind of that scenario, there's, it's safer to say, yes, this may involve it because we don't know. But then when you get to the sub questions, you'll see that involvement's actually pretty limited in this context.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with Dean, and I think the key word here is may involve. I mean, obviously, the intention of annexation is to, potentially develop that site in the future. So I think it's important to look at that now.
but yeah, we're definitely, it's almost certain that the master plan will be followed to a T. They almost never are. Someone could come in there and say, I want to build a tomato farm on the whole 240 acres or whatever it is, and we can decide to do that. So I don't think we're like really saying that this is our master plan and this is what we're going through, but yeah, let's just start answering questions.
Okay.
Let's do this.
Okay. So say yes on that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And now if we get to proposed action may involve construction on land where depth of water table is less than 3 feet. Again, we don't have a specific plan, and Mike, I don't think we had any water table depth that low, that shallow.
Let's just say no.
Okay. And proposed action may involve construction on slopes of greater than 15%. As one of the consultants' reports confirmed, it's really a flat area other than when it dips down to the river. And in that spot, it's not going. There's no proposed construction on the really steep slopes near the river.
No.
That's no.
Proposed action involves construction on land where the bedrock is exposed. I don't think we had any exposed bedrock identified.
No.
Okay. May involve excavation or removal of more than 1,000 tons of natural material. And we don't have a specific plan, so it's
No.
okay. Proposed action may involve construction that continues for more than 1 year in multiple phases.
Yes.
Okay. Proposed action, and just to be clear, if we identify a large impact, moderate to large impact, that allows for further analysis through part 3 seeker findings. So based on that trigger, we will, you'll see at the end of this exercise that the council can authorize myself and other special counsel and the city's consultants to then prepare proposed part 3 EAF or findings.
Oh, never mind. No, then.
Dean, wouldn't this be no, actually?
Well, I would think I was joking. So, like, I think if we're going forward with this sort of like, here's our in the future, this is our plan. If we're going forward like that idea instead of what Elizabeth was saying, then if you follow any sort of construction on this, it's gonna take more than a year, most likely. There's 240 acres, unless you're gonna build up a whole development in less than a year. So I think if we're going forward with this sort of fiction look on the future, the answer to this one has to be yes.
Okay, let's keep moving. Proposed action may result in increased erosion.
No.
Okay. Proposed actions located within a coastal erosion hazard area. That's not triggered. So, right, Mike or Melina? Okay.
Correct. The answer is no.
Okay. The next one is impact on geologic features. Proposed action may result in the modification or destruction of or inhibit access to any unique, unusual landforms on the site. For example, cliffs, dunes, minerals, fossils, or caves.
No.
Oh,
Okay. 3, impacts on surface water. Proposed action may affect one or more wetlands or other surface bodies. For example, streams, rivers, ponds, or lakes. So I did, as we did identify, there are some potential emerging wetlands on the site. And there are, if anyone's been there, depending on the season, there may be some wetter areas. So with that information, what's the direction from the council?
Yeah.
Well, but it's not a definitive wetland, it's only emerging wetland. Is there a differentiation here?
This question does not qualify it as a DEC jurisdictional wetlands. It basically just describes surface water or wettish areas. So that's a really broad category.
Aren't there a couple streams on that property?
Yeah, I
Yes,
don't know
there
whether they're
is.
classified or streams, but there are certainly some culverts, and Melina just answered that. Yep.
Okay, so it's a yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Proposed action may create a new water body.
No.
We just
No.
say no, 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 yes, no, 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 no.
If you want to, for B, I'll just read as quickly as I can.
Okay.
Okay, may increase or decrease 10% or more of a 10-acre.
No.
Okay,
No.
Proposed action may involve dredging of 100 cubic yards.
No.
No.
Proposed action may involve construction within or adjoining a freshwater
Yes.
wetland.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, established wetlands, wasn't the answer no to that one?
Well, yeah, what's the definition of within or adjoining? I don't think we would, or anyone would be building anything that close to the river.
Right.
Not if the Saranac River Trail is going.
No, but she's talking about, Milena pointed out there was some culverts and there might be some emerging wetlands. So I guess to be on the side of caution, just say, yeah, we'll assume that.
Small impact may
Uh,
occur.
And the property does adjoin the Saranac River.
Yeah, but I don't think there's any construction being.
So again, just so everyone understands, just if we identify a more moderate to large impact, there will be proposed findings which can clarify kind of the scope of those impacts. So that's a helpful way to kind of further flesh out these answers. You're stuck with a form right now, but in the future, next week or the following week, we could provide much more clarity with respect to how big those impacts could be. And it's only after that next week's exercise that if we said, nope, there's definitely potential significant adverse impacts, that would trigger an environmental impact study versus that not being certain at this point.
Okay. I still think it's a yes.
I say yes. Also, this is the only one I see in here that's possibly a yes. And we said yes on the initial question, so.
Okay. So consensus no for E, F, G, H, I, J, and K.
Yeah, that's what I see, unless someone has a question on H.
Well, a lot of this, yeah, so just about the wastewater. So the intention, because the town has a sewer line, this is in the town, and there's a sewer line that actually connects to the city's wastewater infrastructure. So there's no anticipated septic field, and there's no anticipated groundwater wells because there's access to these public wells and public septic systems. So a lot of the questions involve discharge to wastewater, which would not be applicable because there's an existing infrastructure on site or readily connectable to the site.
Well, I'm thinking more of maybe otherwise create a source of stormwater discharge. I guess that's.
That would have to be mitigated, so that wouldn't be a discharge, right?
Okay. So yeah, I'd say no to all the rest.
All right, does everyone agree with Pat?
I do.
Yes.
Okay, moving on. Impact on groundwater. So the proposed action may result in new or additional use of groundwater or may have the potential to introduce contaminants to groundwater or an aquifer.
No.
No.
Okay. Impact on flooding. Proposed action may result in development on land subject to flooding.
No.
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 Impacts on air. The proposed action may include a state-regulated air emission source.
No.
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 Number 7, plants and animals. The proposed action may result in a loss of flora or fauna.
No.
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 Well, I guess there was that thing about the bats, but we're saying only do the construction, any construction or.
Do
Right?
it in the winter. Do the winter
In the
construction.
winter.
cut down the trees in the winter.
Only, yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Yes, I don't think, Melena or Mike, correct me, I don't believe any, was it Eastern, I forget the exact bat species. I don't think any of those bats were identified on site, but to be further protective, any construction can occur outside the time that they're active or in the habitat. So it's,
I guess they said they could, because they exist in Clinton County. I mean, I'm looking at number H here, which maybe, like, the proposed action requires the conversion of more than 10 acres of forest. Yeah, maybe, like,
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Patrick that H could be a yes, as it, the action could lead to conversion of the forest. In terms of the actual bat habitat, I don't think any were identified. That's just part of the background GIS researching. And typically, if it's a state or federally funded project, that may trigger additional ecological studies to pursue. But if it's all just going to be sold for private development, that really doesn't have much crossover.
okay. Other than H, is there any other potential impacts?
No.
so let's do yes on H just to get that,
Yeah.
like, labeled in the part 3 or whatever.
Okay, impact on agricultural resources. The proposed action may impact agricultural resources. One of the consultant study did confirm this is not in an agricultural district, even though there is some historic farmland use, but it's not an active farm.
No,
I'd say.
No?
No.
Well,
Impact on aesthetic resources.
No.
The land use of the proposed action are obviously different from or are in sharp contrast to current land use patterns between the proposed project and a scenic or aesthetic resource.
No.
No.
You know, like the highway?
I like the big holes in the ground out there.
Number 10, impact on historic and archaeological resources. The proposed action may occur in or adjacent to a historic or archaeological resource. Mike, can you touch on that real quick as far as that consultant's report?
I thought it was like 0.4 of a kilometer away from the nearest site that Pikes containment.
Yeah, I think from a historical resource portion, there wasn't anything found pertinent to the site itself that would impact historical resources. But in regards to archaeological, being in proximity to the Saranac River, it is identified as potentially archaeologically sensitive. The consultant's report we had identified that a vast majority of the site's already been disturbed by Norco's activity. However, their recommendation would be if any development is pursued in undisturbed portions of the site, that then phase 1B archaeological explorations would be recommended for those portions of the site.
Wait, so the Saranac River is an archaeological site? Is that?
It's not an archaeological site, but it makes the area archaeologically sensitive such that settlers or other past people had used the river corridors for their traveling and settling. So therefore, sites within proximity to the river are more likely to have artifacts than other areas.
So I guess it could be yes with B and C as yes. Obviously, A would be no, because there's no actual determined archaeological site. But if you're saying that places contiguous to the Saranac River could be archaeological sites, then I guess yes would be and C.
Because B says it is as designated, so there's no designated archaeological sites, but maybe C is in to potential archaeological site not included in the SHPO inventory.
Oh yeah, you're right. So maybe just C.
Yeah, I would think just C.
Okay. So if that triggers on E, if any of the above A or D are answered moderate to large, which C was, continue with the following questions to help support conclusions in part 3. So the proposed action may result in the destruction or alteration of all or part of the site or property.
No.
None. They're all no.
Yeah.
Okay, 11, impact on open space and recreation. The proposed action may result in a loss of recreational opportunities or a reduction of an open space resource as designated in an adopted municipal open space plan.
Obviously.
No.
No.
Impact on critical environmental areas. The proposed action may be located within or adjacent to a critical environmental area.
No.
No.
13, transportation. The proposed action may result in a change to existing transportation systems.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Or small
Yes.
impact.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, we talked about the Stantec report, which was pretty clear saying if there's this full development, you may need some traffic control devices. So for A, what do you think on A?
A, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Didn't you already say that the town's existing plan already incorporates sufficient capacity?
I guess we could.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah,
say A and B, and we'll get them fleshed out more, and then I don't see any of this stuff having an impact for the same reason as like Elizabeth and the mayor were talking about earlier. But I guess if we're doing that, I would say yes to A and B.
Okay, Mike, in that preliminary master plan, did we have 500 more vehicles potentially?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and then what about C, D, and E?
No.
Impact on energy. Proposed action may cause an increase in the use of any form of energy. So that does include renewables or solar. We do have a potential solar farm as well as a substation, proposed potential substation on the site.
Yes, then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so A,
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
B.
Yes. Well,
Mike, on that count of that mixed use area, do you have a count on that?
We're talking about which item on B?
On B, yeah, 50 single or two family residences. Oh, or no, or to serve commercial or industrial use.
Yeah, so we would meet that threshold.
Okay. 250 megawatt hours per year. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Heating and cooling of 100,000 square feet of space.
More than likely.
yeah, easily.
We hope so.
Yeah.
And I don't want to gloss over, there's also other impacts. So by all means, if you have other just concerns that aren't on this form, you can identify them now, or obviously we'll identify them in the subsequent review. Okay,
I mean,
almost there.
that are kind of covered in those broad terms as stated in the first four.
Okay. 15 impact.
On number C there, I'm trying to think what Bill Tracy would tell us. Do we have 2,500 megawatt hours to spare?
Well, I think we do in the summer months, especially as the Bitcoins drop. We've seen the Bitcoin usage drop about 7.5 megawatt hours, I believe, and don't quote me on that. But I think it's safe to say that the project could impact the proposed action may utilize more than 2,500 because we're talking about you put another mold right in there. There's another 10,000. So I think it's easy to say that.
Megawatts over years. So the answer is yes. 2,500 megawatt hours is a pretty small amount of electricity for industry, but it's also very small compared to our capacity.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, to follow up on that, the mayor's correct. We worked through with PMLD on what a projected energy use might be for the overall master build out. And they had looked at that too in terms of if they were to put a substation on site, how they would size it. And so we came up with roughly 12,400 megawatts per year. Wow. And that would equate to about a 2% increase in the 2019 electric usage within the city of Plattsburgh.
Now, one thing to point out on section E, there was a potential, again, very speculative, that there could be a solar farm. So would you want to include that potential, generation potential for the site as well in the positive column?
Yeah, and you can also put in there that we would be placing conventional hydrocarbon-based energy with potential hydroelectric energy, so it's a positive energy impact, not a negative one.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of times where I thought, well, there might be a positive impact, like with the recreation. There's no recreation there, but by putting in a trail, if as anticipated might go in that master plan, there's a lot of positive impacts. This seems to only be asking about negative impacts, but
Okay.
let's put it in.
Okay. 15, impact on noise, odor, or light. Proposed action may result in an increase in noise, odors, or outdoor lighting.
I don't think it's significant.
No.
Well, so it doesn't say significant, just an increase. So I think we could say yes. But then on each one of those little things, I would say, can we do that? Can we say yes?
Yeah, that's fully appropriate. That's taking a hard look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Patrick.
Because it will definitely increase noise and outdoor lighting, but I don't think I don't think any of them would be allowed to go above our noise ordinance and other ordinances like that.
I
Okay,
agree.
so yes, but no on each, or no or small for each subsequent question.
Yep, I agree.
Okay. Impact on human health. The proposed action may have an impact on human health from exposure to new or existing sources of contaminants.
No.
I would say no. I guess it's possible, but if we do yes again, I would say all those little things are no.
I would say no.
No.
Okay. Last two, consistency with community plans. The proposed action is not consistent with adopted land use plans.
No.
That's a yes. Right? I mean, that's a yes because it wouldn't be consistent with the town's land use plans.
Yeah, that one's hard for annexation. If the town consented, then that would be a different story. Milena, do you have any thoughts as city planner?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes to this one. Developing that preliminary master plan, we did take a hard look at the town's new smart growth plan and their proposed zoning for that section of Ruger Street. And the zoning and the land use proposed in our preliminary plan does, match what the town is proposing. So I would say it is consistent with community plans since we are trying to work in concert with the town's plans.
Well, then the answer would be no, because it's asking if we're not consistent, correct?
I would say yes and then put no on all the little ones. Just because, it's certainly not consistent with their land use plans because didn't they have a sort of moratorium on putting a substation or anything in there? Maybe that was just
They had a moratorium on industrial use along the, I guess it would be northern portion of that property along Ruger Street. But as far as their zoning is concerned, I believe it's, as Dean mentioned earlier, it's service center, which allows for mixed use, which is what we're proposing on that portion of the property.
Okay. So would you say yes and no on all the little impacts, or no, just all the top?
Well, I think she's saying they don't have an adopted land use plan that's inconsistent with what we're trying to do. They have a moratorium, but that's not an adopted land use plan.
So no.
Yeah.
I think it's a no.
Okay. So is there a consensus for no on this?
Sure. I was thinking it'd be yes, but that's because I was thinking if we go with what Elizabeth's rationale that I don't think they have a land use plan that involves the city of being the municipality. But I'm fine with no.
Okay. Last one, proposed action is inconsistent with the existing community character.
No.
No.
There's no community character.
There is nothing there.
Well, wouldn't that be yes then? Because there's no community character there, and the plan is to put some community character into
I
it.
think the town would argue there is some community character there, but you have to look hard to find it. I would say no.
Well, again, if you look to the sub questions, they may help you out a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, one is even though there's not much there, the proposed action may create a demand for additional community services. For example, school, police or fire.
Yeah.
Right. And you're not only considering what's on the existing or the parcel in question here, but you're also considering the surrounding parcels, including the residential neighborhoods to the east in the city of Plattsburgh, and also the mixed use to the west in the town of Plattsburgh. And I think the master plan that we developed is consistent with the character in the city and the town.
So then 18 is a yes.
So yes, then no, then yes, then no.
Yeah, the way this is worded is confusing.
So B, yes, and then the rest, no?
Well, I would say F would be yes. Right? Proposed action is inconsistent with the character of the existing natural. Well, no, I would say no for that. The proposed action is inconsistent. I mean, it is inconsistent with the predominant architectural scale and character of no buildings and. Right.
I think B is the only one. B is the only one that needs a moderate on that.
Okay, does everyone agree with Elizabeth?
I will, yeah.
Yes.
All right, we did it.
Holy
We
smokes.
got through part 2. Thank you for your indulgences. Thanks, Mike and Milena. Anything else you guys want to add, Mike and Milena?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so just so everyone understands, by identifying a few moderate to large impacts, the resolution and the next step would be to authorize myself with our consultants to then further the review either through a recommendation of an EIS or through a completion of the part 3 of this environmental assessment form, which will flesh out a lot of these answers.
There's no way that this project needs an EIS. I'll just throw that.
Yeah, you can't make that determination until you're ready to make that determination.
Fair enough.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'm good. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you. Please continue, Beth.
Resolved that the Common Council hereby amends the organization rules of the Common Council, which were approved at a meeting dated January 2nd, 2020 as follows. Effective May 14th, 2020 through December 31st, 2020, the weekly committee meetings, work sessions, and regular meetings of the Common Council and their standing committees will be held earlier in the day so that the committee meetings, work sessions will hereafter commence at 4:15 p.m. and the regular meetings of the Common Council will hereafter commence at 5 p.m. The mayor's assistant or city clerk is directed to provide a notification to the press, the department heads, and also to publish this revised meeting schedule in the city's designated paper.
Moved by Councilor Gibbs and second by Councilor Moore. I'm sorry. Discussion? Roll call.
I'll say I don't really have a problem with this. It might lead to me being late to council meetings. I have court sometimes till 4:45. But that's often the case as we have it now, because if I have a court session in Essex County that goes to 4:45, I ain't making it back here for 5:30 either. So whatever you guys want, I don't really care.
Roll call.
Councilor Barbell,
Yes.
Councilor Kelly,
Yes.
Councilor Gibbs,
Yes.
Councilor McFarland,
I'll abstain because I don't care. Well, we'll vote yes. I'll change my vote. We'll vote yes because I know it's to accommodate our new counselor. And yes.
Councilor Moore,
Yes.
No travel requests at this time. Are there any items for initial consideration? Any new business or councilor reports? I would like to just continue a conversation that you started earlier from Councilor Barbell. Justin Ine from the YMCA is here, and he'd be happy to speak with you, to talk to you about some of his visions, and consistent with Councilor Barbell's questions earlier, if you'd like to take a few moments for that.
That'd be great. I forgot all about Justin being there, and I'd like to say I'm sorry if I had known that secret thing would take so long. I would have made a motion so you could talk earlier.
No problem. Here, let me. Does this help? There we go. I do think we need to have some cardboard cutouts of you in these seats here. It just it helps a little bit. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. And again, I'm open for discussion here. Part of my coming here today is I had some initial conversations with the mayor, and I sent Dean and the mayor kind of a little high-level overview of some ideas that I'm thinking about this summer as we start looking at summer camp and as the Y starts looking at its plan for reopening. Of course, all of what I'm saying is based on the rules of the state and the CDC and the Department of Health, but we're making sure that we have all of our plans in place so that when we are able to, that we're able to, turn the key and start phasing in our members. With that said, we've been holding childcare programs since March 16th for essential workers and others across 3 counties, in Malone and in Saranac Lake, as well as in Plattsburgh in 2 locations. We know as the summer months creep closer towards us, our families are going to be looking for some respite. Me being a parent myself, I'm looking forward to having my kids have some more time outside. So we're putting plans into place right now to make sure that the camps that we provide, the summer programming, whatever you might want to call it, are going to be the best they can be and offer a great program for families, for the kids. With that said, and with the anticipation of, and I'm calling it physical distancing, because social distancing, we still want to have social interactions, but we can do that from a physical distance. But with those rules and regulations that we are sure are going to be a part of programming such as ours, space is going to be important for us. So I had initial conversations with the mayor about the opportunity for us to run some of our day camp programs, the ones that happen normally on Oak Street, at the rec center and in the fields outside the rec center. Again, I put a very preliminary proposal. I've not written many of these before, but in overview, we are hoping to come to some sort of partnership or understanding that we could potentially use the gym area at the rec center and the fields out front to operate our program for the summertime. We wouldn't need to use the entire building. Obviously, we'd need some bathroom facilities, but mainly the main gym and the fields out front. I suspect as long as it's nice weather, we would be outdoors as much as possible. We would provide the programming, the staffing, all the essential needs of operating. We would just obviously need to have discussion of the use of the facilities and, any other details that would go along with that. I'll take a breath there. I also had discussions about the beach, but let's take them as 2 separate at this point. Any questions for me?
One, I'd like to, hope that this is one of the things that might actually benefit a lot of families in the city of Plattsburgh. So, I know I'm willing, and I know others on this council will be very willing to work with you to try to figure out how we can make something like this happen. The concern I have, they're the only concern that immediately pops up for me, is one of the most popular programs at the gym is pickleball. And pickleball, occupied a half of that gym space, but it's only there for a few hours in the morning. Now, maybe schedules can be changed. What would your schedule look like? Would it be early morning to early evening when you're running a childcare program for?
Are you saying that pickleball is happening now or no?
No, nothing is happening now. The gym is entirely closed.
Right. You're saying when it was
a very popular program for seniors
Sure.
in our community. And what I'm looking at, or would want to at least think about, and I don't need an answer on this right now. I just want to think about what your schedule would look like. And then maybe rather than them playing in the morning from 9 to 11 or whatever, they might play from 7 to 9 at night or 6 to 9 at night.
Sure.
It might open an opportunity for that group of individuals to be able to get re-engaged in something that they, there was a lot of enjoyment for a lot of people with that.
I think what Justin was saying is just using them for
Yeah,
the
no,
summer.
I-
until the gym is closed, or I could be wrong.
I'm sorry, Mr. McFarland, what was that?
I think what you were suggesting was using the gym for the summer months for your camps activities while the gym is going to be closed, correct? Or is this?
That's correct. I guess I'm understanding the question, could we accommodate this additional program during those times? But I guess to answer your question directly, summer camp programs start somewhere around 8 o'clock and they go till somewhere around 5 o'clock. Again, depending on what we're, going to be allowed to do. We currently, in normal days, start our programming at 7:30 and go till 5:30 with what we call our pre and post care of camp.
Well, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Any other questions on the recreation complex before he discusses the beach a little bit?
I'll just say I agree with Ira. Sounds like a good idea to me. I think as long as everyone else says it can be done, it sounds like great.
Great. And again, I'm also obviously available for any other questions you might have. The concept of the beach is a little bit. I didn't put any words to that in my email this afternoon to Dean and to the mayor, just because I think there's so many other variables that I'm just not familiar with. And so what I'm speaking to right now is I guess just what I know, and there is some speculation there. So please correct me if I'm wrong. But if there's an opportunity for the Y to help operate the beach program during the summer, we are certainly open to that discussion. When we open our Y, and depending on the phases that we set for ourselves for opening the Y, our pool will have more than likely limited capabilities for programs other than lap swimming and potentially some group fitness classes, again, dealing with social distancing. And we are also toying with as far as the hours of which will be open. Again, this is all not laid out just yet. I don't want our public to be concerned with that just yet. My point being is I believe we'll have lifeguards available to be able to want to pick up the hours and work for that program out on the beach. So I think there's an opportunity here for us to be able to assist the city with, I think, just an incredible asset. Personally, as a family member, we love going to the beach, and hearing that it would be closed, understanding completely why the decision was made, and following the governor's direction. Again, if there's an opportunity, we would love to be at the table and figure that out. And discussion needs to happen now so we can plan and train and get things going.
Discussion?
I don't have any questions. I think I love that idea, and I think discussion should happen because maybe the beach can open. But what I was hearing Director Miller describe was it's very hard to do that with such uncertainty because plans need to start being made now, training lifeguards, and hiring people seasonally is tough, especially if you don't know when they can start. So if we can start a discussion and possibly get a way and to open the beach if and when it becomes possible, that the Y can help out with lifeguards and meeting those staff needs on a snap decision. I think it's definitely worth opening.
I think with our partners in the community and the staff that we have, training should not be a problem. I think one of the big things that comes to my mind is enforcing said rules at the beach. And not leaving it to a young lifeguard to enforce those as far as social distancing. Obviously, they can enforce the rules of the water and being safe and such, but I think we would need to have that discussion of additional help down there so that we can enforce whatever those rules are.
I think there's a wide range of opportunities to partner with the Y on this and come up with some unique strategies. As I said in an earlier conversation we had on this subcommittee, it's not let's just replicate what we've done in the past, but let's think about new strategies and new ideas about how we can use this facility. And I think that we'd be more than willing to work with you around that, or I would be.
Right.
Anyway.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you all for your time. Appreciate it. Be safe.
Thanks for staying so long. Appreciate it. Thank you. Is there any other new business at this time? Seeing none, is there any speakers? There's no additional speakers here. Is there any speakers that have reached out to you, Beth?
No.
And Ethan, anybody waiting to get online?
No.
Okay, seeing none, then do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councilor McFarland, second by Councilor Barbell. Roll call, please.
Counselor Barbell?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs excused herself at 6:53 p.m. Counselor McFarland?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Thank you very much. A very long but very productive meeting. Appreciate it. Thank you and stay safe.
Good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.